40 miles to Canada, my truck tore across Montana. Ian Tyson.
Welcome everyone. As everyone is getting settled, please feel free to type in the chat box where you're calling in from. We'd love to say hi.
The radio, 'cause there's just a little more to go before I cross the border at that sweetgrass sign. I'm Alberta bound, it's a piece of heaven that I found. Rocky Mountain.
Hello from New York City, Deborah. We have Robin from Asheville, North Carolina. Hello, Robin. Welcome. Pat in Las Vegas. Hi, Pat. How are you doing today? And Wendy from San Diego. Again, welcome everyone. If you just joined us, please feel free to write in the chat where you're calling in from. If you're joining us on Facebook, welcome. We'd love to hear where you're dialing in from. You can type that in the chat box below. We have Jane from Ontario. Welcome, Jane. And Gladys from Saskatoon. A few of our Canadian friends up north joining us. We got Brenda from Calgary. We'll be talking a little bit about your town here, Brenda. Janet from Everett, Washington. And we have Ada from Puerto Rico. Hola, Ada. Hi, Pat from Georgia. Glad to see you here. We have a lot of people from all over the U.S. and Canada calling in. So excited. So glad you could join us. Until I die. All right. Wow, Alberta Bound. What a great song. Good tune. That our special guest Patrick actually picked that out for us today, and I'm enjoying it. Great. Let's get started. It is so great seeing many old friends in the chat box, many new. If this is your first time viewing one of our Travel Talk webinars, welcome. And if you've joined us in the past, welcome back. We are so glad you are all here with us today. Since this is a webinar format, the only people who will be able to share their camera or sound will be myself and our other presenter today. Even though we won't be able to hear you, we do want to hear from you. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A box located either at the top of your screen or the bottom of your screen, and we will be happy to answer those towards the end or throughout as we're going there. If you're joining us on Facebook, please put your questions in that chat box below and we'll be able to answer those for you as well. So let's get started. Ahead of the webinar, we did have many questions coming in about when is Canada going to be reopened for travelers from the United States. While it is still currently closed, countries are opening up every day, and we are confident that Canada will be following that trend soon. So stay tuned. If I had an answer for you, I would love to give it to you, but we are not sure yet. You can also call into our office for updated information. We have it on our website as well, what countries are going to be opening up. Right now, we do have tours on the road and others preparing to travel throughout Europe and the Americas. So we are just getting excited to revamp or ramp up our travel again throughout the world. If you're curious to know the status of your upcoming tour, you can visit our website or contact us in the office. And if you're interested in going on your next adventure and getting that on the books, I know I am, you can feel free to give one of our tour consultants a call and they'll be able to help answer which countries are open now, which might be more likely to be opening in the future, and get all of those questions prepared for you. All right, now let's shift gears a bit. And we are going to get to the main event, what we're all here for today, to talk about the Canadian Rockies and British Columbia. This part of the world is undeniably one of the most breathtaking places I've ever visited. From the fresh mountain air to the quaint towns filled with some of the most friendly locals you are going to meet on the road, Western Canada is one bucket list item that you do not want to miss. Today, we are actually joined with a special guest who I'm going to be introducing to you shortly. He'll be sharing with us some of the highlights of Western Canada, along with different ways that you can experience it with Go Ahead Tours. And so here's our agenda for today. We're going to be talking through some of the different tour highlights. Of course, you can't talk about the Canadian Rockies without mentioning the incredible wildlife that you might encounter. Then we'll discuss a bit about the tours that we offer and that can bring you to the Canadian Rockies and BC. And at the end, we're going to finish up with a section devoted to answering your questions. So as a reminder, throughout the presentation, if you have questions, please feel free to use that Q&A box. Or if you just want to interact with everyone else, you can use that chat box and share your thoughts there. So here at Go Ahead Tours, we believe the best way to learn about the world is to experience it. And we want to help open the world through education and create these travel experiences that allow you to interact with the country just like the locals do. We take care of all of the little details, ensuring that as travel is opening back up, and like I mentioned, it is starting to open up again. So exciting to say that. Everything that we do for you, it's arranged specifically for you, so you can have an incredible and safe experience without the hassle or without having to look for all those special regulations. We'll take care of those details for you. Between the handpicked hotels and the authentic meals, the on-tour transportation and personalized flight itineraries to get you to your trip, we cultivate a unique and unforgettable experience for all of you, all of our very cherished travelers. But what really brings our tours to life, and if you've been on a Go Ahead tour before, you will absolutely agree with me, it's our expert local tour directors and local guides. Their passion and love for the countries that we visit bring that experience to life. And today we are lucky to be joined by one of the incredible tour directors that we have and a personal friend of mine, Patrick Toomey. Patrick has been a tour director with Go Ahead for quite some time now, and he's actually joining us today live from his home in the Canadian Rockies. And so I'm so excited to have him here today. Patrick, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. It was fun to see people signing on from all over. It's always fun. I even saw someone from Israel, so shalom. And Brenda I saw in Calgary, so I'm just up the road. So I literally live on the side of Buffalo Mountain here in Banff National Park. But just a quick shout out to Josh. We are actually genuine friends. A few years ago, I was leading a Go Ahead tour to Cuba, and Josh was on that tour. And so we got into all sorts of trouble, but we're fast friends ever since. So it's nice to connect, of course, virtually. It's the way we all do now. But I am here in the mountains. My name is Patrick Toomey, of course. Dad was an Irishman. On my mom's side, I am 5 generations from here in southern Alberta, in the Canadian Rockies. As luck would have it, I was actually born in Vancouver. In fact, I was born in North Vancouver in the same hospital as Brian Adams. So it really is home. I've toured through something like 40 countries, but this is where I am, and it's a real honor to share it with all of you. And so, you know, things will open up, and you will be able to come back, and there is home. So let's start off and just give you a bit of a talk about the whole region here. Obviously, the Canadian Rockies is really as much a concept as something broader. We all have our images of the wild mountains and so forth, but I just want to get a little technical for a minute, if you don't mind. The Canadian Rockies are actually distinct from the American Rockies, and trust me, I love the American Rockies, but the American Rockies is sort of a catch-all term for all those eastern slope mountains. The Canadian Rockies are a mountain chain, about 1,450 kilometers, 900 something miles long, from way up in the Yukon in the north down to Glacier National Park in Montana. So that's one contiguous formation. East to west, they're roughly 150 kilometers, 100 miles on average. Why are the American Rockies a different experience? Well, because of the world's largest pimple. What's that? The world's oldest national park, Yellowstone National Park, the giant supervolcano. As that pushes up out of the ground, it's changed the whole geography. The Canadian Rockies are ancient seabed that roughly, to split the difference, 75 million years ago, were thrust up out of the ground. So the gentle slope is always facing west and the severe slope is east. So that's why the Rockies are in and of themselves their own thing, the Canadian Rockies. And so obviously I'm here in the town of Banff, but as we look at the bigger picture here, what we'll talk about today is obviously Banff. There are actually 5 national parks that are the Canadian Rockies. 4 are contiguous: Banff, Jasper, Yoho, and Kootenay. And then there's Waterton Lakes National Park. On the different go-ahead itineraries, we visit, well, all but Kootenay, I guess, because the Columbia ice fields are up in Jasper. So we see them all. Lake Louise is in Banff, but always warrants its own mention. And incidentally, I was at the lake this morning and the ice is now off it. June 8th, but for us, that's an event. Then we're going to carry on to central British Columbia, which is the Okanagan Valley. That's no longer the Rockies, but imagine British Columbia, which is the 3rd largest province in Canada in both territory and population. Imagine it as a giant accordion. So the Pacific plate pushed under the North American plate and it's folded up. Coastal mountains, Columbia Mountains, and then the Rockies on the east. And then we'll get out to Vancouver, which, you know, I'm pretty lucky. I've traveled the world. I still kind of have to give it favorite city status, at least on a sunny day. So, you know, there's so much to talk about out here, but we'll carry on along. And of course, effectively every story that we have here in the Rockies starts in Calgary, as it should. So Calgary is the largest city in the province of Alberta, and we were listening to Alberta Bound by Paul Brandt. Calgary is famous for the Stampede. It's a true booster city, and I'm happy to get into boosterism, but that's a big concept. But it's a very interesting city. One of the stories I like to say, so there's about 1.4 million people, but these are the isolated big cities in North America. 3 hours north of Calgary is Edmonton, the provincial capital. But from Calgary south, it's a full 3 hours and plus to get to the border with Montana. Now, I love Montana, 4th biggest state and territory, 1.2 million people. It's a long way before you see other populations. So these cities are isolated. But Calgary, let me explain the economy to Calgary for you. Ready? This is really complicated. You might want a pen. Every building there is a bank or oil. There, I finished my story. Alberta has the 3rd largest oil reserves on planet Earth. So Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Alberta. But Calgary, I love the Calgary Tower too. The Calgary Tower is the highest sightseeing tower on planet Earth, yet it's not the tallest building in Calgary. The highest sightseeing tower on Earth because it's on top of 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet. That's like a little pin on top. And there's the Saddle Dome. It's actually the oldest arena now in the National Hockey League, where the Calgary Flames play a form of ice hockey. It has let us down emotionally. But Calgary is also, and just to put it in some perspective, Calgary is considered the most conservative city in Canada, normally of the big cities, yet the mayor was the first Muslim elected mayor of a large North American city. So, you know, that's the interesting mix. It's a vibrant city, and it's an interesting city. So all our tours come into Calgary's International Airport. When you arrive there, incidentally, there are people with white Stetsons, Cowboys hats on. They're volunteers saying welcome. So when Josh says there's a sort of welcoming, friendly vibe out here, that's not simply propaganda. It's actually quite organic, and it goes back to a high rate of volunteerism. So in Calgary, one way or another, you arrive to the city. We always stay somewhere in the city center, and we'll always have some version of a city tour. I change it just about every time, but of course, Calgary became famous with the Olympics. Now, this fella here is Colonel MacLeod, and if you have any Scottish connection, you'll get Fort MacLeod, Calgary, Canmore, Banff. They're all Scottish names. Banff is actually named for or by Sir George Stephen, the first president of the Canadian Pacific Railway, and he was from Banffshire in Scotland. But Colonel MacLeod heads up, and I am shortening story because it was actually Brisbane first, but he comes up to the confluence of the Bow and the Elbow rivers, and they establish in 1875 Fort Calgary. So it's a very young city. Now, the whole west of Canada belonged for over, well, roughly 200 years to the first incorporated business in North America. So if that rings a bell, I know we're not chatting back and forth, but the Hudson's Bay Company. Now, that was much more relevant up in Edmonton. Down south here was all bison. And it was bison and the people who lived off the bison, you will probably know as the Blackfoot Nation. There are 3 linguistic groups in southern Alberta, Tsuut'ina right around Calgary, 2 down in Montana, and they lived off the bison. In fact, 2 hours south of Calgary is a very romantic spot, Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump. We do visit on one tour, but that was the largest food harvest on planet Earth until the Industrial Revolution. So the relationship between the police and the First Nations, and we're talking a lot about First Nations at the moment in this country. Let me just step back for 1 second. When I say First Nations, in Canada in general, we really don't use the word Indian anymore, and nor should we. There's a country with 1.2 billion people in it who all happen to be Indian. We have 3 designations: First Nations, of which 63 different languages are spoken, Cree being the most prolific. Then there are the Métis Nation of Canada, or Mestizo, you might know. They were the male fur traders and First Nations women that created their own culture and identity, predominantly French-speaking, but not entirely so. And then the Inuit, who you might know of as Eskimo people, but they're up in the far north. So anyway, just a little taster for Calgary, with a lot to talk. And then, of course, you leave Calgary, and in Calgary on a sunny day, you see the mountains. It's only about 45 minutes out. In fact, we stop always at Canada Olympic Park, which is where Eddie the Eagle jumped, and the Jamaican bobsled team. You drive out there and you see the mountains in the distance. What you're looking at isn't actually Banff. At that point, you're looking at Kananaskis country, which is a provincial park. And you pass through, which I include on every tour, the town of Canmore, which is, even though I live in Banff itself, I consider Canmore sort of my hometown, and my son grew up there. That is the Olympic town. Has the highest percentage of Olympic athletes in the world. But you come into this great wall of mountains. There's really only 3 passes from east to west or west to east through the Canadian Rockies. So it's a very clear line. And in the case of Calgary, Canmore, Banff, Lake Louise, it's the Bow River we follow along, or the Bow Valley. Now, there's the famous Banff Springs Hotel. So let me start out with a quick question. In fact, I can even check the chat for a second. What year did the United States purchase Alaska from the Russian Empire? I'll give you a couple of seconds to take a guess there. They paid 2 cents an acre. Seward's Folly. I tell you what, just in the interest of time, I'll tell you. 1849, good guess. Oh, Angela, you're so close. Well, no, sorry, you're not close. 1960, I saw 1867. And not 17. 1867, the United States buys Alaska from Russia. What year, and I know there's a lot of Canadians on board, what year does Canada become a country? Tell you what, I'll help you out anyways. There you are, thank you, Monica. 1867. You see a correlation? So Manifest Destiny, 5440 or fight. The US purchases Alaska from Russia. Russia would never have sold it to Britain because they were tied up in a war in Crimea at that point. So they purchase all of that so they don't have a border with the United Kingdom, with Britain. Well, there's this little nascent colony called British Columbia. It wasn't even called British Columbia. It was Vancouver Island and New Caledonia, the mainland. And they found gold in Barkerville. Well, they built the Caribou Trail up to the center of British Columbia to get the gold. They wanted to stay part of a British Dominion. So the east of Canada forms a confederation, Upper and Lower Canada, Ontario, Quebec, Loyalist New Brunswick, beautiful Nova Scotia, creates Canada. 1870, they sign, 71, actually, they sign a deal with British Columbia that they will create this country, this dominion across the continent on the proviso that it's linked by a train. And then the whole middle land, Rupert's Land, all the drainage basin into Hudson's Bay, which is where I live, is purchased from the Hudson's Bay Company and becomes the Northwest Territories. Well, they're building a train across the prairies, having a grand old time. They come out to the mountains. It's beautiful, but they run out of money. And 2 things happen here. On the back of the mountain you're looking at there, Sulphur Mountain, it's all very porous because the mountains are made of limestone. The snow melts down, heats up in the mantle, comes back up, and there's natural hot springs. 3 fellows find it and say they're going to build a resort. This is 1883. And the government of Canada says, we love that idea of Yellowstone down south. So in 1885, they declared it a national park. So that's the first national park in Canada. Second in the world, that's a little debatable, but certainly one of the founding national parks of the world. William Cornelius Van Horn, in charge of building the trains, has run out of money. And he looks around and he uses a phrase that we still repeat today. He says, if I can't export the scenery, I'll import the tourists. I'm going to build a castle in the mountains. And they build the Banff Springs Hotel. Can come on a tour with me? The story's a lot longer. They build this grand hotel, and that finances the train. And then from that comes Chateau Lake Louise, Chateau Frontenac in Quebec, which is the most photographed hotel in the world. The Empress in Victoria, we even have a photo of it later. And there was a ship that left from Victoria to Asia, and it's because of this train across Canada that the sun never sets on the British Empire. Now, I'm not too empire oriented, but this is that great connection, and this basically finances how the country comes to be. Now, I will always take you up for photographs of the hotel. Personally, I don't love staying in these big old hotels. They're always a little bit out of town. They're smaller rooms, but they are grandiose, and they're the story of the foundation of Canada. They're now Fairmont, but they were, of course, Canadian Pacific hotels. Now, I cannot tell the story, and I've already mentioned First Nations, but people, it's not that settlement came 200 years ago. People have been living in Banff, we know archaeologically, for 11,000 years. I just want to tell you a little bit about this video before I play it. So the closest nation to me is the Stoney Nakoda Nation. Linguistically, they're part of the Sioux family. So if you know Custer's Last Stand, Little Bighorn, that's the Sioux language group, which is distinct from the Blackfoot language group. These people were up here hunting, and they were suddenly told they were British subjects. That wasn't sort of their goal. But one day, I live about 2 kilometers, and this was last, I think, October. I was just driving home. You can see the clouds. That's what an evening sunset looks like for us. And these people were, it was during, of course, COVID, so they were being socially distanced. And they were just having a little sunset ceremony. So maybe we'll just play this for a second. Just an honor to be able to see that sort of thing. It's funny. I mean, I still play a little drop-in hockey, and I have a couple of guys from Stoney who play. And my son played. He's actually turning 15 next week, but played competitive hockey. And it would be fun to go into the change room. And when we talk about it, it's fun to introduce these canoes at this point, because when we go into the change room, I actually speak French with my son. He goes to a French school, so we're bilingual. We're more bilingual out here than we are in the rest of the province. About 20% French speaking, and it's testament to these canoes. You see voyageur canoes. These are obviously tourist oriented ones, but the voyageurs were the fur traders. The Hudson's Bay Company was run by the British, but the bulk of the workers were French Canadians, les coureurs du bois. But just coming back to the story of being in the change room, so I would be speaking French with my son, and then the dad speaking Japanese to his, a couple of others speaking French, 2 parents speaking Stoney with their kids. That's the mosaic today. And just as a fun little side note, any guess what our single largest minority group is that lives here in Banff? Just for fun, because it adds again to the mosaic of who we are. But at any given time, so Banff's permanent population, the town of Banff, is fewer than 9,000 permanent inhabitants. We're probably 14,000 on a daily basis with all the workers, and we welcome about 5 million people a year. But our largest minority group are actually Australians. So now Japanese, we have a large Japanese population, although less so. But yep, there's 2 kids in my boys' class where one parent's francophone, French speaking, and one is Japanese. But yeah, Australians are our biggest group because, of course, Canada is part of the Commonwealth of Nations. And so every year we share visas with Australia, and this is sort of fun. So 5,000 young Canadians go to Australia to learn to surf, and 5,000 Australians come here to ski. And so we get the Kiwis, the British, we're getting Irish. We now have Chileans, which is super fun. I had actually lived in Chile, so it's a nice mix, very outdoorsy country. But these voyageur canoes just is a little reminder of, if you understand North American history, to know the history of this continent in terms of settlement, you have to first travel by boat, then by train, then by car, then by plane. And that's not just the West here, by no means. Think of the Mississippi or the St. Lawrence or the Columbia, the whole story. That's how you view the world. Many people I saw from New York, well, all of those canals. And for Canadians down east, what is Ottawa? It's Bytown. It was building the canal to have an all-Canadian route around the rapids. So water tells the story. Now, Alberta is one of the driest provinces, but the Rockies, of course, are full of ice.
Hey, Patrick, before we move on, actually, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we do have a question from the audience. We actually have a question from Margaret. She's asking, is there opportunities, now that we have the Voyager canoe here, are there opportunities when travelers are on the road to either take a canoe out or maybe even horseback ride?
Oh, great question, Josh. Yeah, so there's always free time. A tour is not a tour in Banff unless you have at least a half day free. So just down, I was going to pick up the computer and show you out the window, but just down the road on the bend of the river, you can rent canoes and you can paddle right out in there. I honestly don't know what they cost anymore. You can paddle out to the Vermilion Lakes. Make sure you paddle towards the Vermilion Lakes because the other way is the Bow Falls, and that would be your last canoe trip. I do suggest that if you've never canoed before, I'm not sure on tour is the best time to learn it. Canoes famously are very tippy, but there are places to do that. Horseback riding, of course, in the early days coming into the parks, people would travel on horseback, and we have the Warner Stables in Banff. Just as a reference, if you look at your itinerary when you're coming here, you would want to probably write and reserve, say, horseback riding on a free afternoon before coming here. Just about everything is full and sold out all the time in a normal season. So that would be a choice to make. If you are a walker, and I expect many people who come on my tours are, you can walk up Tunnel Mountain or Buffalo Mountain. Say, I literally live on the side of it. It's the smallest mountain with a mountain designation in the park. Takes me, and this is not bragging, takes me about 25 minutes, but I'm used to the elevation. I'm at 1,450 meters right now, about 5,000 feet. You will take longer, unless you live at some altitude. So if you live in Denver, you're coming down. But you can climb up there, and then you can wander down, and then you can go home and tell your friends that you summited a peak in the Canadian Rockies. But it's a nice zigzag path. So there's always walking opportunities. In fact, on one of our itineraries, I always stop where there's the most inland giant cedars, and we go for a walk together. Just before I carry on with this gorgeous photo here, a side note is obviously this is a mountain wild environment, but just about everything is disabled accessible. So I have had the honor of having people in wheelchairs on tours, and of course they're not going up the stairs to viewpoints, but they are seeing just about everything, and that's important. There's my view down Main Street. That is Banff Avenue. Just about every street in town is named after animals. So I live on Otter Lane, but that is Cascade Mountain, and Cascade is as dramatic as it looks. It's a bit snowier today because we had snow yesterday because it's June. But up along the top, we're just about 8 meters short of 3,000 meters. So just shy of that magic 10,000 feet. But they call it Cascade Mountain. The First Nations called it Weeping Mountain because you have these cascading waterfalls that come down it. Look at that blue sky. That is roughly 260 days a year. And it does allow me the opportunity to talk about with you the climate. What I say on every single tour, whatever time of year you come, when you wake up in the morning, go outside. And if you're comfortable in that temperature, that is going to be the coldest you are all day. Another couple of points to mention. And we're higher altitude. We're not high enough to get sick, but you're absolutely high enough to feel it, and you will dehydrate quickly. So I ask people to bring water bottles. We're really moving towards banning plastic bottles altogether. We have arguably the cleanest drinking water on earth. So fill up your bottle out of the tap. It's perfect, good, and delicious, and naturally filtered through limestone. The sun, even if it's cool, the sun is remarkably sharp. So I put on zinc sunscreen just about every day. Just the nature of the beast, hats, sunglasses. Now, we can have rain, of course, and if we're going to have a rainy period, it's generally spring, but very rarely would we have 5 days straight of rain. So it is possible to see these beautiful bluebird days. Now, when you're out wandering in town, of course, it's a resort town. I do want to also just draw your attention onto the left. There's a red flag there, and that says Berceau des Parcs Nationaux du Canada. So that means the birthplace of the national parks. And that is testament to the fact that here in the national parks, everything's bilingual and services are bilingual, although the predominant language here is English, and it's good Albertan English, eh? But lots of fun restaurants, little terraces, very walkable. And for people growing up here, now I happen to be home at the moment, but I honestly forget to lock my house all the time. I'm not afraid for myself. What I'm afraid of are animals. I carry bear spray. And so at the beginning, every morning on tour, I'll spray you with it. No, bear spray is a pepper spray. And I've never actually used it, but I always carry it. Deer wander through town, elk are wandering through, so the animals are everywhere. We do have mosquitoes, but mosquito season is quite short and not particularly troublesome, but it's the marshy lands as you can expect after rain. No black flies here at all, so that's lovely. And again, bone dry, so it's not that humid. If anything, your eyes feel a little dry or your throat can get a little raspy, but that is town. And at some point during your stay in Banff, you must walk to the end of Banff Avenue, to the bridge over the Bow River, and take that photo looking down. So I know we can stare at that all day.
I was actually going to ask you, Patrick, because that did look absolutely incredible, and Banff was one of my favorite times to go. I was there in August, but we have a question from Thomas here, who is actually asking about what would you say is the best time of year? I know you mentioned you have rain sometimes and snow, every day, but what would you say is the best time of year for someone to come to Canada?
It's and again, I'm not going to speak for Canada because I would tell a different story about Quebec or Ontario, right, with Northwest. I can tell you the worst times to come here. So don't come in November and don't come in March. You'll notice that Go Ahead doesn't offer tours most times. November is that shoulder season where it might rain or snow one day, but yet we don't have our Christmas lights yet. So March, same thing on the other end. So in terms of deciding when to come, May is generally speaking the best month for animals. And that is because the snowpack is still there. So animals come down into the valleys, but the bears are awake. However, people come to see, and there's Two Jack Lake, which is just up the road, just a few kilometers up the road. They come to see these incredible lakes. They're still frozen in May. There's still ice on them. So that's a choice to make. June, I say I was at Lake Louise this morning. Suddenly the ice is all off it. In fact, somewhere we have I think at the beginning, we had a picture of Lake Louise, literally what it looked like today. So that's lovely, but then you might have a little bit of rain, but it's up and down. Summer for us, if you ask a Canadian from out west here, it's July and August, like that summer. It is gorgeous, but it's busy. Schools are out, and regionally, Calgary has 1.4 million, Edmonton 1.2, Saskatchewan, people drive here. So it is really busy. That's why, and it is actually, and it's a fair shout out to Go Ahead. And you almost have to take a tour in the summer because you won't get accommodation. Everything is sold out. And I do like to mention a little bit, if on the summer trips, of course, you have the hottest days and beautiful weather. When I say the hottest days, if we ever get to 30 degrees Celsius, which is 87 Fahrenheit, that we melt. Right? That's as hot as we get here. And still at night, it's down to generally low digits and uneasy to sleep. But on those summer months, I will always adjust my tours. In fact, I'll be knocking on your door at 6:45 a.m. to leave for Lake Louise to take you out to see the lake before the crowds arrive. So, and then September into October is gorgeous. You have a higher percentage of blue sky days, maybe a little less luck with animals because the snowpack has melted off by then and they move up into the valleys. And then the snow starts falling. As an example, this last year, and I was home every day, we had minus 20 and 20 centimeters of snow in the middle of October. Now, it was a little early, but I skied on November 1st this year, and my last day skiing was May 2nd. So that gives you a sense of the year. But really, from that May, late April through to mid-October, there's a reason for each season. So I know that's quite a convoluted answer, but I hope it helps a little bit. Just moving on now. This is a photograph. We're actually looking at a very famous mountain called Howling Peak. And you know what? I'm going to save the story. You have to come here for me to tell you the story. But I like this photo because I'm up above the town of Canmore here. But this explains what I mentioned at the beginning. This is the Rockies 101. Just the west side is the gentle slope with the trees on it. The east side is the severe slope. That rock has traveled roughly 200 kilometers from west to east as they've been pushed up out of the ground. Then they were carved into the shapes we see principally through glaciation, but after the rivers. And you can see, you always tell the difference. A glacial valley is a big U and a river valley is a V. And so you'll see the little river, that's the Spray River down there. By the way, that mountain there, if you ever saw the movie, this isn't the story, I'm going to tell you about it when you come to stay. But that was, if you saw The Edge with Anthony Hopkins, plane crashed into it, fought some bears in Alaska, that's where that was. And further down that valley into Cape Country is precisely Fear of heights. Oh yes, let me answer. There's a good question there, Ann. Further down that valley was Brokeback Mountains. So sorry, Josh, I just saw someone just asked whether someone who's scared of heights can come on this. Yeah, 100%. Generally speaking, the roads are in the middle of valleys. There are a couple of viewpoints where you wouldn't want to get close to the edge. You maybe wouldn't want to do the cable cars, but no, you're generally surrounded by the mountains. So I don't feel like heights scare people very much. But yeah, that's the Spray Valley, and that's now this is in the town of Canmore. That is the Bow River. The river is not that green right now because it's actually in flood. It's not in flood so that we're risking buildings, but we're at very high water because all the snow's melted. I took that photo. That's about an August scene. Now, those are the Three Sisters in the distance, lovely limestone mountains. That is what the rivers look like. And I always include, we don't have it on the itineraries, but that's part of the reason I've been with Go Ahead so long is so we don't really have local guides. I mean, I guide the whole thing in the West here. Then I decide on the day based on weather and time and so forth. But this is a place I always come into. And there's the mighty Bow River, which is the story, as I say, from Calgary. That water is flowing east, incidentally, and it's flowing all the way to the Hudson's Bay. So people talk about food out here. Now, when you think of Western Canada, you think of salmon. I promise you, when you get to Vancouver, best salmon in the world. No salmon in this river on Earth, anywhere, because salmon can swim 1,000 kilometers up the mighty Fraser River. What it cannot do is walk the last little bit over the Continental Divide. So this water is flowing east, and these are the Bow Falls. Bow Falls in Banff, made famous by Marilyn Monroe and the River of No Return. Let me just mention very quickly, the falls right now, you see some rocks in that image? Can't see any at the moment, full flood. And 2 weeks from now, it might be right down again and see the rocks. So, but that's one of the automatic stops in Banff. And of course, the lake itself. So this is a Moraine Lake. This is a Cirque Valley, which is a glacial cut valley, and that is the Victoria Glacier at the back. In the Stoney language, it was the Lake of the Little Fish. The first European to see this was Tom Wilson, 1882. I mentioned earlier, I will get you up out of bed very early. We will get up here, and you're up at about 1,900 meters, 6,200 feet, and it's 2.2 kilometers to walk to the back, but it's flat. So I try and do that with everyone who's up to it. And I always say to groups, I'm not trying to lose you. I'm going to walk at the pace it takes to get to the back and come back within 2 hours, but as an experience. But Lake Louise is as magical as it looks, and you need to see it. And then, and I mean, I can go on about the lake all day, but we cross the lake to the ski area. Lake Louise ski area, biggest single ski resort in Canada. This is the first World Cup downhill every year, except these last two, in November. And we do a ride and dine lunch. And I love this. And I prefer going up at Lake Louise there is a gondola in Banff. You can do it on your free time, but it's just too busy. This one, you get a lunch and comes as a little surprise more to Europeans, but we don't cook our vegetables, so they're all raw. So it's a very basic lunch, but basically you're getting free food and they're throwing in a gondola ride. But you go up, and this is one of the best places to hopefully see grizzlies. Now, obviously, this weather contingent, but this is a very typical day, that image. However, the gondola photo we have here isn't 100% true. Actually, yeah, because that's the Banff gondola now that I look at it. But the one at Lake Louise, you have the gondola and you have the option of a chairlift. So you can have your legs dangling free. That's even more fun. You go up the mountain and then you look across the valley and you see the chateau and the lake in the distance. So that is, I see it very much as one of the highlights. I would say over the last year, of course, we didn't do tours, but over the last 10 years, I probably had to cancel the gondola ride twice because of weather. So, it is something that we can do, and you have lunch in the largest log cabin in North America. So yeah, that's a real highlight.
I wouldn't be recommending that one to our friend who has the fear of heights, the open air one, right? Right there, Patrick.
I had a lady from Massachusetts with her whole family, and she was in her 90s, and she was just lovely. And she had, people laugh at our accents. I just love that accent, right? A real Boston. And I took her up on the chairlift, and I don't usually go up. I just wait down. And I went up and I held her hand. And of course, they're the detachable quads, so they feel fast. And then when they come into land, they unhook. And she said, "Oh, that was a little much for my heart." And she was just so much fun. So yeah, absolutely. If you're scared of heights, those are things you can miss. But you still get to look at it. I mean, it's wonderful stuff. Yeah. Now, Peyto Lake is world famous because it's probably the most turquoise of all of the lakes in the Rockies. When you see that turquoise color, and that's not a doctored photograph, when you see that color, you know you're in a glacial area. That's because of rock flour. So glaciers ground the rock up, hence the Rocky Mountains are rocky. But as the glaciers have come down, they've ground the rock into such a fine powder that it neither floats nor sinks. It's suspended and it refracts that light off. So later in the year, you'll see that in the Bow River and and if you see it's clear water, then it's not glacial water, which of course is beautiful. But Peyto Lake, you'll only see this if you go up to the Columbia ice field. Highway 93 North, Columbia is one of the 10 most beautiful drives on earth. And we go up as a day. It's a long day, but it's a very worthwhile day. And they've been rebuilding the viewing platform and it should be open about now. So that is just one of those magical spots. The parking is at 7,200 feet. And you wander down, not far, about 25 meters, 30 yards to get the view. Then you have to turn around and walk back up. That's when you know you've been at altitude. But this road is distinct from other roads because it goes over 5 river systems all the way up to the town of Jasper. But we go up over 2 and then turn around and come down. So Peyto Lake is the head of the Messiah River system. Now there is the Athabasca Glacier. So the Columbia ice fields are the second largest non-polar ice fields in the world. The largest is Campo de Hielo del Sur in the south of Chile and Argentina. This is the most accessible on the planet. The ice field, if you imagine an ocean of ice, and then 6 frozen rivers going off. One goes down into British Columbia, and the other 5 come into Alberta, the Athabasca Glacier. And if you come in high summer, sometimes upon arrival, you think, well, that's not very big, but it's only because everything else around it is so massive. So in the middle of that glacier, that tongue of ice, that's about 300 meters or 1,000 feet deep. And up top, the ice can get up to 1,000 meters or a kilometer deep. So the experience is big and complicated, but you get on a bus, you drive down, and then you get on these massive snow coaches with huge wheels. They drive down and out, and you bring an empty bottle because if there's any water melting, you can fill it up. To purify it, you should always mix it with Canadian whiskey. Just a safety thing. These guys insist on throwing that photo in. That's actually a winter shot, although it can snow any time of the year there. I just like to do handstands everywhere because we're so outdoorsy and fun. So it's just kind of a fun one. But there's the light. Incidentally, when you come to the ice field, people always ask me, oh, do we need to dress up? Sure, but you're out on the ice for about 25 minutes. It's a 2.5 hour drive from Banff. We make stops. People come out of their hotel rooms dressed like the Michelin Man. You're not going to freeze to death, but the wind is always howling. But I do like this photo because that's winter there, and I'm in a sweatshirt. I do have gloves on my hands. It's kind of a fun one, but it's the light is always wonderful. So moving on, so the Rockies, of course, we could talk about all day. There's many different places we go, but central British Columbia, and if you allow me just to step back, because depending on what itinerary you choose to do, you're either just coming to the Rockies, which is fine, but if we're going through to the west, and we have a few, we have the other one that goes down to Yellowstone and Jackson, Wyoming through Montana, which is also a magical tour. But as we go west here, if you're taking the train, the Rocky Mountaineer, people are often confused about that. The Mountaineer, you do not sleep on the train. So you take the train out to Kamloops. Kamloops means in the Kamloops First Nation language, meeting of the waters. The 2 Thompson rivers come together. I like Kamloops, very blue collar city. But it comes together, you overnight there. And the train sort of takes care of everything at that point. You're met, they take you to your hotel, bring you the next morning, and then you carry on to Vancouver. Keep in mind, it's called the Rocky Mountaineer, but only about 5 or 6% of the journey is the Rocky Mountains. So this is actually, as much as I love my Rockies, it adds to it because you're actually going through so much territory you don't expect to see, including the Fraser Canyon, which is the way down into Vancouver. If you choose to do the overland trip, then we head west through the town of Golden into Canada's Glacier National Park, and then into Revelstoke. And Revelstoke is just, it's where I live move to. That's the headquarters of the Canadian Avalanche Society, huge ski resort there. They get tons of snow. Those are not the Rocky Mountains, but you see how it's still mountains. They're the Monashees actually around there. They circle the town of Revelstoke. We can stay on those tours. And I really love that tour. So it's not that I'm against the Mountaineer. It's a wonderful experience, but so many people then come back and do a driving one. The Canadian Rockies are one place. Well, I've had a lady year before last was on her 7th tour with me here. So doing different versions. So once you've experienced it one way or the other, but we could say anywhere from Golden all the way out to Revelstoke. The brochure always talks about Glacier National Park, but I think many people think of Glacier, which is in Montana. The Canadian one is where I can take you for a walk around giant cedars. I intentionally didn't put in a photograph because I love that as just a surprise. Revelstoke, just after that, you move into the Okanagan, which is the big dry central valley of long lakes and vineyards. And of course, when you think of the most frozen country in the world, you always think of wine, right? But, down east, the Niagara Peninsula, right, south of Toronto, the Great Lakes are like giant hot water bottles. Well, here the same thing. That lake there, Lake Okanagan, with Ogopogo in it, it's kind of like the Loch Ness Monster, is 90 miles long, 130 kilometers long and thin because it's a melted glacier. So when we get to, Kelowna is interesting because it's full of these multi-million-dollar homes and everything, but we go to a vineyard that actually looks like this and we have lunch. The town itself, or the city, I should say, 100,000 people, is very spread out. So it's quite contingent on your tour director, your tour guide, because I come in and always do a view up at Knox Mountain. I'll say my only negative to actually Kamloops or Kelowna is that it's so spread out that you really need us to take you around. It's one big strip, but all around it is this scenery. And that's why having 2 nights there from Revelstoke to Kelowna is only a few hours. So that's a day where every time I do that tour, I just make up a tour based on the weather. And I love having that freedom. I cannot stress enough. It's what keeps me coming back, because one day I went up to the dam, another day I went back up to the national park. One day I took people on those mountain coasters, they're like luge. We did that in Revelstoke. And then you get into Kelowna and enjoy this lake country. So these are places that are famous in the Canadian context and not particularly known internationally. And that's part of the discovery. You're still seeing the shape of the mountains, but it is a different formation. So it really depends which itinerary you're taking, what you're going to see in the center of British Columbia. And then you get out to Vancouver. So if anyone is familiar with the Human Development Index, Vancouver has been many times rated the top city in the world in which to live. Interestingly, Calgary made 4th a couple of years ago, 4th best city in the world for quality of life, and Vancouver fell a bit because of cost of living. Those towers you're looking at are among the most expensive housing on planet Earth. In fact, by a matrix measure, it's only slightly more affordable than Hong Kong. And I love putting in that Hong Kong link, because when you look at those big towers, it looks like Hong Kong, and it was Hong Kong money. So Vancouver, about 2 million people are Greater Vancouver, out on the West Coast. You first arrive, and Vancouver can be, particularly when you've come in from all the great outdoors in the mountains, can be a little overwhelming. But it's one of the healthiest cities in the Western. It is, I think, if you measure obesity and so forth, the healthiest city in the developed world. And it's a concrete jungle, but it's a concrete jungle where in 20 minutes in every direction you get out to wilderness. So sometimes if I'm doing a driving tour, I actually zoom in and do part of my city tour on arrival, because you drive through the concrete and then you suddenly come out to the other side. And of course, the largest city park in the world is Stanley Park. So Vancouver itself is it's a story unto itself. That is Canada Place. There's someone just said you can ski and golf on the same day. You can ski and sail in the same day too. There are 3 ski areas along the North Shore. Usually when I have free time in Vancouver, I go to the North Shore and I do the Grouse Grind, the hike up Grouse Mountain. Now you're considered fit if you can do it in an hour, and you're only allowed to go up because you have to take the gondola down because it's too steep. And I had another gentleman in his 80s do that with me once, and at 85 he ran the New York Marathon. So pretty solid, a go-ahead tour. Well, your hometown is a fabulous place. So Canada Place here is sort of Canada's response to the Opera House in Sydney. This is where the Alaska cruises either leave or arrive. So if you've ever thought of an Alaska cruise, there's a good chance you will be arriving to this port. I strongly encourage Alaska cruises, the ones that come in or out of Vancouver, rather than Seattle. No offense to Seattle, but the Seattle ones don't always get up to Skagway in the north. So they call in at Victoria. But yeah, this is just a lovely site. And that whole walkway, and in fact, right down from Canada Place is where you have the Olympic Torch 2010. Now so the 2 images here on the left is someone jogging, that's the seawall. I presume that's sunrise, but you're over in Stanley Park looking across. The building with the round top, by the way, you see in the distance, is actually a view tower, the outlook, or the lookout, Harbor Tower. And then Gastown is the old sort of, it was actually called Gastown in the early days, or Lower Granville. And it was a rough city, and now it's this fabulous international diverse city. And on the right, a totem. Totems come from the West Coast, of course. We see totems in Banff, but the First Nations of my part of the world, of course, had teepees, and on the West Coast are the totems. And British Columbia is making really incredible strides at moving forward and reconciliation with First Nations people. And that element infuses, in fact, I like to say, what Americans call the Pacific Northwest, so up towards Seattle, we call it Cascadia, which is really Seattle, Vancouver, or Portland all the way to Anchorage, as an economic zone, is one of the few places in the world where the colonizers have adapted the native arts, because frankly, it's just so spectacular. And so totems are all up and down the coast there. I just saw one thing about thanks. And traveling December and January. Well, I'm doing a presentation for Go Ahead here, and Go Ahead doesn't yet have a winter tour. Vancouver, I love all the time. I mean, I've actually written a couple books about Canada, but I love Vancouver. But Vancouver can be very, very rainy in the winter. It is, well, it's a rainforest. So consequently, I love that. When I used to do tours in Ireland, people say, why is it so green? Why does it rain so much? But here in the Rockies, and hopefully Go Ahead, I'll have one up one day, because I do winter tours here, and having the frozen experience is also just magical. Walking across Lake Louise, but that's a different conversation, I think, for a different day. So, and then once you've been to Vancouver, if you've come out on the train, you have the option of a day trip over to Vancouver Island, which is fine. It's a long day, about 12 hours. We don't tend to run it. You go off with the company, but it's fun. On our overland one, you can have 2 nights in Victoria, which if you can spare the extra 2 days, time-wise, you sort of have to do it. It's surprising. Victoria is the capital of British Columbia. And in fact, they were separate colonies, like I mentioned earlier. That is the Empress Hotel, which again, I mentioned earlier. Everything in this picture is wild, because the brick is Scottish brick. The city is very Victorian, very English, and the first school was French. So Victoria is about 500,000 people. Its inner harbor is magical. It's totally walkable. The Parliament building, which we don't have here, but was designed by Rattenbury, and is an architectural gem, and they have lights on at night. So at some point you have to walk down in the evening. You can go for high tea, although I don't recommend it in the Empress, to be honest. For the $60 investment to have cucumber, I can take you also to the oldest pub in all of British Columbia, which is 1 block away. But Victoria, and every trip to Victoria always includes the Bouchard Gardens. Now, they're unabashedly touristy, but the Bouchard Gardens are considered among the best gardens in the world, and that's because it's a microclimate. It's down in a little basin. But just north of Victoria is the Cowichan Valley, which is the highest mean year-round temperature in Canada. So I think someone just asked, you need 2 days. You need 2 nights. Oh, I see. It can pop up from Seattle. Well, I always think the trip over on the ferry is just spectacular. The ferry ride itself, and I make people stand out in the back of the ferry with me, because you leave Tsawwassen, and you cross open water. No one ever gets sick, calm as can be. It's the largest ferry network in the world. But you cross, and then you wind through the Gulf Islands, and we stand on the back deck together, and very often we will see eagles, porpoises, seals, and once in a while even whales. And so you go whale watching, of course, when you're in Victoria as well. But popping over from Seattle can be done, but it's a high speed. I'm doing that on a Go Ahead tour actually in October. Actually, there's still space on that one. It's a private one, but I know there's space on it, starting in Portland and coming up. Just that I thought about that. So wildlife, these are Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep. They're not goats. They're horns, not antlers, because they keep growing. They don't fall off. You ever see their skull? It's got a little bone on it, and the bigger sheath grows over it. And that's why these guys can run each other at 30 kilometers an hour, bang heads, and not have concussions. Small brain helps too, but they're endemic. So that's one of the spaces. And then that's up by Tujac, which I showed you earlier as well. So I'm just waiting for the screen just to move on it. There is a small grizzly that was 500 meters from my house when I lived in Canmore. So that is a photo on my phone. Now, we don't always see bears, of course, but they are there. How do I know it's a grizzly? Look at the hump on the shoulder. And they have longer claws. We don't see his. If you get the little curved claws, we say black bear's claws are retractable, not true, but they're curved, made for climbing trees, whereas grizzlies have the long ones. And this bear was out here just munching on berries. So bears are around, and we do talk about bear safety. You cannot outrun a bear, but you can outrun your friend. So always hike with someone slower than you. This photo, I wanted it in here because even though it's not the clearest photo, I took this from the front of the bus on a go-ahead tour. I was in Waterton Lakes National Park. This is the one that goes south down to Yellowstone. I am about a 20-minute drive, maybe even less, from the border with Montana there. Mummy grizzly and her 2 cubs running across the street. Look at the blue sky, the green. So I can't guarantee the weather, but we have more of this in a mountain area than most other mountain areas of the world. And that was literally running across the street. Those are elk, 350 elk in Banff, another 300 in Canmore. That's looking down Mount Rundle on the Bow River later. That's later September. And the elk are getting ready for the rut there, which is their loving time where they bugle and stop us from sleeping. That is elk. So those are all female elk in that photo. But it's lovely. So it is. And then you can't mention the Rockies without mentioning, well, Western Canada. So I see eagles most days. We have a small eagle population here. When you get out to the West Coast, eagles are absolutely everywhere. Incidentally, we have osprey, which are wonderful, wonderful fishing birds, but we also see golden eagles from time to time. Now, they're even bigger. They have the strongest claw strength of any bird, and they're usually way up, but once in a while we see them. But driving to the ferry to go to Vancouver Island, these guys are out there, see them in Stanley Park. So the bald eagle, it's a magnificent animal. So lots of other wildlife to talk about, and that is, of course, a big part of our conversation. Again, threw this one in here just because I was at the front, again, of a tour coach with Go Ahead Tours, and that's by Tujack Lake. So that's just another element. Robin just said, how outdoorsy do you have to be to enjoy this tour? Well, Banff is also a cultural center. The Banff Center is dedicated to arts and culture. So they're smaller towns, but remember, Vancouver is a very art-oriented city. Here, if you're a painter, a photographer, obviously it's built for that. But I would argue, say my father, who I lost a couple of years ago, was a classical composer, and he was Irish originally. This is where he chose to make home. So there's a bigger cultural element to the environment here than one would think. We have among the highest education level in the world. So I suppose that, but it absolutely, this isn't Venice, and it's not trying to be. But your quality of conversation and quality of subjects and environmental study and art. I mean, there's art galleries all over Banff and Canmore and Vancouver, including Indigenous art. So I would offer that maybe as it's also vast. British Columbia, well, Alberta's twice the size of Germany. And so British Columbia is bigger than that again. Anyway, we can go on all day, but I just like to hand it back to my friend Josh there, and then I'll be happy to have questions and answers.
Great, thanks, Patrick. And actually, that's a great question because, coming from me, the first time I went to the Canadian Rockies, I will easily say I'm not an outdoorsy person. I'm definitely a city boy. I'm living in downtown Minneapolis right now, actually. And but going there, I wasn't outdoorsy. Leaving there, I now am outdoorsy. It's just, it captures you, and it's absolutely beautiful. So, even if you're not an outdoorsy person, you're going to enjoy this. And there are so many different ways that you can do so on a go-ahead trip. And so the first thing I would say, when people are asking me, since I, work at Go Ahead and I travel very often, is where do I start? And I always say, you really want to start looking at what is your travel style or what suits you the most. And luckily we have multiple different travel styles and options for you, coming from our classic tours, which that might look like the Rocky Mountaineer tour or one of the national parks tours that we have. You can also do adventure tours. So if you're someone who is more outdoorsy, who wants to get into hiking or rafting or anything like that in a smaller group, the adventure tours are going to be something that you may be interested in. And if you see our brochure and there's nothing in there that is truly what you want to do, but you kind of want to make it your own, we have that option for you as well. So you can work with our team. And like Patrick was mentioning earlier, there was a tour that was built, a private and customized tour that takes up the Pacific Northwest. You can do that in Canada or in any other region of the world for that matter. to make it fit for you and your friends and family. But I do want to highlight some of the tours. If you're like me, Patrick has done an incredible job here of getting me excited about heading back to Canada. So here's a few of the tours that he was mentioning and what you can experience some of what he has talked about. We have the Canadian Rockies by train. So this is the tour that does take the Rocky Mountaineer, starting in Calgary, the gateway to the west, and heading through Banff and Lake Louise. You get those incredible experiences. You take the train to Kamloops, where you do get off the train and spend the night in a hotel, and then you're back on the train to finish off in Vancouver. We also have the new Canadian Rockies Adventure. So this is an exciting one for those who do like to get outdoors and do more hiking or whitewater rafting. It's a week long, and it's just Calgary, Banff, Lake Louise, Canmore, that area. And you can actually extend it if you want a little bit more time down to Glacier National Park, which highly recommend you do that for sure. Like the Rocky Mountaineer train, we have the Canadian Rockies, Banff, Kelowna, and Vancouver. This is over the ground, so on a motor coach, where that's where you'll get to see the central British Columbia that is more the wine region and what we were showing earlier in the presentation. And this is the tour that you also get that extension to Victoria. So, you know, if you have the chance to do it, like Patrick said, this is going to be a great option for you. And of course, this is probably my favorite tour. The next one I'm going to book to the region is our National Parks tour, because you get that beautiful Canadian Rockies with Banff, Lake Louise, but then it comes down into the U.S. National Parks, Glacier and Yellowstone, and ending up in Jackson with the Grand Teton National Park. Absolutely incredible. You're going to see different vistas, different wildlife. This is a great tour to see both the Canadian Rockies and then coming down into the U.S. National Park. So definitely recommend that. But now we do have some time, and I've been seeing some questions coming through. If you still have more questions, please use that Q&A box and we will be happy to answer them for you. Let's see here. I'm going to take a quick look to see what questions we have. Oh, this is a great
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Josh. Sorry.
One great question that came in, that's one of my favorite questions to ask, is actually Carolyn's asking, what are some of the foods that you're going to eat in Canada? What are some of your favorite foods that you would recommend?
Well, I always have to preface it and say, if you're vegetarian, you might know that vegetarian is actually a word from the Cree language. It means poor hunter. No, we actually have, it's very easy to be vegetarian here, but I jokingly say we're part of the sushi belt out here. So from starting in about Calgary West, there's a reason why we're generally considered the healthiest people in North America, the developed world, because like out in Vancouver, so often sushi in the corners replaced other kind of fast food. However, Alberta is beef country. So it's organic beef. My grandparents, great grandparents homesteaded, right? So it's excellent beef country if you like beef. Remember to take an extra mortgage on your house if you're a drinker. Alcohol is incredibly expensive here. It's all taxed, but we have free health care paid for by the tax of booze. So drink up. So that's an element. But yes, beef country is very clear. When you get out to British Columbia, then you're in the salmon world. So in just a macro sense, if you're familiar with Canadian cuisine, you might have heard of poutine, la poutine, which is French fries, cheese curds, gravy. Well, there's places in Banff where you can have that with elk meat on top. I eat bison a lot. So buffalo, but North American bison. So that's often common. You'll see bison burgers. So fun things like that. You will have everything as familiar to broad North American cuisine to very interesting, kind of diverse. Yeah, snow crab. When you get out to the West Coast, absolutely. I mean, crab out there. I would eat crab here, but it's more a coastal thing. And in fact, at the floating market, the floating houses in Vancouver in the afternoon, they have buckashuck oysters. $1. So it's just awfully yummy out there as well. But it's international, obviously, as you can imagine. So here in Little Banff with 9,000 inhabitants, we have 200 eating facilities. But I mean, that's just a general answer to a broad question, of course. 23% of Alberta was not born in Canada and 40% of Greater Vancouver. So very international. And of course, in Vancouver, a huge Chinese influence in the food, which I love as well. So that's just a bit of a hint. I do say when I have people from Louisiana, I say, wow, you're going to have to bring your own spicy sauce. That's a little different, but yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We have another question from Patricia is asking, do you recommend the train or the drive through the British Columbia interior? And which child do you like more, Patrick?
Well, I'm a drive guy. Now, I have also been on the Mountaineer probably 40 times. I sort of retired my hat from the Mountaineer a few years ago. I would have to say, as a sort of lifelong professional guide, me just sitting at the back of the train for 2 days, I find personally, now when it's your first time, the luxury of it's fun. There used to be 3 classes, but there's no longer red leaf. So the standards are very good. Silver and gold. Gold, you have the dome cars. Basically, when you sit on the train, and the train is luxurious and they take wonderful care of you. Like I'm not being negative about it, but you're on the train. So you have to be someone who wants to sit there for that many hours, and you're catered to, and they start drinks at about 10 a.m. or something. So that's the nature of it. What I like about the driving is if I see a bear, we can stop the bus and it's safe. So I like the freedom of that. And even though I guided tourists in Europe for years where I had the local guides and I loved them, out here, it is kind of my team. And I'm not the only one. We've got excellent other tour directors. I'm friends with them. But it gives us the freedom to say, oh, you know what? The weather's not great today. Let's do this differently. I might add, so that's the going west. So I prefer that. Those are the tours I tend to lead. That new adventure one, I think is fabulous, because if you're just here, you're never playing the weather game. British Columbia is also just so worth exploring for years and years and years. And it's so traditional to go from Calgary to Vancouver. But that one that comes around here and then down into Glacier, absolutely, unless you only have a week, which I understand because of working, but make sure you go to Glacier, because then you see Waterton Lake National Park too, it's the only international peace park between Canada and the States. So, and it's the best border crossing in the continent. Like, hey, stop, have fun. It's not like Niagara or anything. And then the other one, as just a side note, the one where we drive down to Yellowstone. I mean, I've done that tour many, many times. We stay on the reserve in Browning, Montana. Great hotel, lovely people. It is shocking to people what the conditions are like on a reserve. And so there's a huge educational element that I like to share on that one too, just as a side note. And there's the Going to the Sun Road. You've all heard of it. It is as beautiful as you imagine, but its season is very short. So it could be snowed out. And I don't mind, because as beautiful as it is, the drive around the bottom of Glacier is just, I was down at the border on my bicycle last week, but of course I couldn't cross the border. And I just was thinking about how beautiful that is. But thanks for the question.
Fantastic. And I know we did receive a question about, do we have tours out east in Canada as well? And so, of course, I think we could have another full presentation about our tours out to the Maritimes and out east as well. But that we might want to save that for another day. I'm sure, Patrick, unless you have something that you want to plug here.
No, very, very quickly say, yeah, I do all the tours across the country, of course. The Eastern Cities one, I'm doing sort of a custom version. And when Josh was mentioning the customizing, that is a wonderful tool to have. But yeah, I'm doing one later September. I think there's still space on that too, but it's a lady from Houston who's the group leader. That one is cities, absolutely. Toronto, Montreal, those are big cities. 65, 70% of Canada's population lives in that corridor, right? So I'm a long way, I'm a 4-hour flight, but really meaningful, vibrant environment. So that's fun. And then the Maritimes, Nova Scotia. If you don't fall in love with Nova Scotia, there's no point in coming here. But it's a different vibe altogether again. So Canada's massive. I mean, it's just like the States, or you talk about Canada the way you talk about Europe. Well, do you mean France or Poland? Like, they're different stories. That's what I'd offer on that, Josh.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Patrick. We are going to bring the presentation back up here. Just last a few things for you to know. If you enjoyed this travel talk, which I know I enjoyed it, and Patrick, you've done an incredible job bringing Canada to everyone's living room today. We do have more travel talks upcoming. So we have Croatia and the Balkans that will be June 15th, learning from some of our tour directors out in Europe. And then we also have London, Paris, and Rome, a destination spotlight on those 3 cities. So you don't want to miss those. If you want to look at even more that we have beyond that, or rewatch some of your favorites, you can on our website at goaheadtours.com/webinars. But that's actually all we have for today. I want to give a huge, huge thank you and all my gratitude to Patrick for being with us today. It's been incredible. It's great seeing you again, Patrick, and I look forward to when Canada opens so I can come say hi and you can show me around Banff.
Will do. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for keeping in touch. And as I say, I know a few people asked, you can check with Go Ahead, because say I'm doing this custom one for a fellow named Jerry, and I just know he has about 10 spaces left, and that's been moved to October this year. So that's going to be Portland, Seattle, Victoria, Vancouver. So I might as well give a shout out because I might start touring again. Thanks, everyone. You're welcome here in Banff any time of the year.
All right, thanks, Patrick. And thank you all. Stay safe.